The metal against the anvil rang out across my property like a church bell, drowning out the sound of the expensive sedan pulling into my gravel driveway. I only noticed my unwelcome visitors when the third hammer strike failed to land, as I caught sight of three figures in business attire standing at the edge of my workshop. Two men in suits flanked a woman with a pinched expression who looked like she just smelled something particularly offensive. That something, I figured, was me, Mr. Xavier. The woman called over the dying echo of metal. "Nicholas Xavier. I'm Pamela Whitfield, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association." I set my hammer down beside the glowing piece of steel I'd been working on and wiped my hands on my leather apron. "Just Nick is fine," I said, not bothering to remove my safety glasses or gloves. "What can I do for you and your entourage?" The woman's nostrils flared slightly as she took in my workshop the forge, the anvil, the racks of hammers and tongs, and the pieces of ironwork displayed around the space. Her gaze lingered on the propane tank that fed my forge, her lips thinning to a nearly invisible line. "Mr. Xavier, I'm here with our HOA legal counsel," she said, gesturing to the men beside her. "We've received numerous complaints about your hobby." I raised an eyebrow. "My livelihood, you mean?" "Whatever you call it," she said with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "It's in direct violation of the Oak Ridge Estates covenants and restrictions." Section 7, Paragraph 3 clearly states that no homeowner may operate a business from their residence, particularly one that creates noise disturbances or potential safety hazards. I'd been expecting this since the day I moved in 6 months ago. The HOA had been surprisingly quiet when I'd begun setting up my forge in the detached workshop behind my house, a quiet that, apparently, had now come to an end. "I've read the covenants, Miss Whitfield. My property is zoned for mixed use. I checked before purchasing." One of the suits stepped forward, extending a business card. "George Thompson, HOA counsel. Mixed-use zoning or not, you still fall under the jurisdiction of the HOA covenants you signed when purchasing this property." I took the card without looking at it. I don't recall signing anything that said I couldn't continue my profession. "Perhaps you should have read the documents more carefully," Pamela said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're giving you formal notice that you have 7 days to dismantle this facility. After that, we'll be forced to take legal action." I looked around at my workshop at the forge I'd built with my own hands, the projects in various stages of completion, the commissions I'd spent months securing. This wasn't just a hobby, it was how I paid my mortgage. "I'll have my lawyer review the documents," I said evenly. "Until then, I'll continue working." "I wouldn't recommend that," the second lawyer interjected. "Continued violations after formal notice can result in daily fines of up to $500. I felt heat rising inside me that had nothing to do with the forge behind me. "Good day, Miss Whitfield. Gentlemen, I have work to finish." Pamela's face hardened. "This isn't over, Mr. Xavier, not by a long shot." As they retreated to their car, I slipped my gloves back on and returned to the forge, striking the metal with perhaps a bit more force than necessary. I had no intention of shutting down my forge. What I didn't tell them was that I'd done my homework, before buying this place more homework than they could possibly imagine. That evening, I called my friend Marcus, who happened to be a real estate attorney. After explaining the situation, I asked him to come over and review my property documents. "They're trying to flex on you, Nick," Marcus said as he spread my property deed and related documents across my kitchen table the next day. "Classic HOA power play. Can they do it?" I asked, sliding him a beer. Marcus took a sip, then tapped a section of the property survey. From what you've shown me, your workshop is perfectly legal according to county zoning. But HOAs can be tricky. They operate in this gray area between private contracts and quasi-governmental entities. So I'm screwed. I didn't say that. Marcus flipped through a few more pages, then stopped, his finger landing on a section of my deed. A slow smile spread across his face. Well, did you know about this when you bought the place? I leaned over his shoulder to see what had caught his attention. The utility easement. Yeah, that's why I got the place at such a good price. Previous owner said it was a pain because the utility companies could access that strip of land whenever they needed. Marcus's smile widened. This isn't just any utility easement, Nick. This is the utility easement for the entire Oak Ridge development. Look at the survey maps and the legal description. Your property contains the main junction box and access point for water, power, and gas for about 200 homes. I stared at the document, then at Marcus. So what does that mean for me? It means you have leverage, he said, draining his beer. The HOA might control a lot of things, but they don't control this easement. The utility companies have the right to access it, and you, as the property owner, have certain rights regarding how that access is granted. A plan began to form in my mind. You think I can use this to keep my forge? I think, Marcus said carefully, that the HOA might want to reconsider their position once they understand exactly what property they're messing with. I spent the next day gathering information, making calls to the county assessor's office and the utility companies. By evening, I had confirmed what Marcus had told me. My property contained critical infrastructure that serviced the entire neighborhood. The previous owner had negotiated a modest annual payment from the utility companies for the easement access, which explained the surprisingly low property taxes. While I worked through my legal options, I continued operating my forge. 3 days after the initial visit, a certified letter arrived from the HOA, reiterating the 7-day deadline and outlining the escalating fines I would face if I failed to comply. That same afternoon, as I was finishing up a commissioned garden gate for a client in the next county, a different car pulled into my driveway. This one was a sleek black Tesla, and from it emerged a woman who looked to be in her 50s, dressed in an expensive pantsuit and carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Xavier," she called as she approached my workshop. "I'm Nancy Cooper. I represent several homeowners in Oak Ridge Estates who are concerned about the HOA's actions regarding your business." I set down my tools and wiped my hands. "Miss Cooper, what can I do for you?" "I understand the HOA has given you notice to shut down your forge," she said, glancing around the workshop with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than disdain. "A group of us believe they're overstepping their authority." Again, I echoed. Nancy's lips curved in a wry smile. "Pamela Whitfield has been ruling Oak Ridge with an iron fist for 3 years now. She's driven out 4 families with her selective enforcement of covenants, usually targeting anyone who doesn't fit her vision of what our community should be." "And what vision is that?" "Rich, quiet, and preferably without any visible signs of actual living," Nancy replied dryly. "Several of us are tired of it. When we heard about your situation, we thought perhaps this could be the line in the sand." I studied her for a moment, trying to decide if this was some sort of trap. "Why my situation specifically?" "Because you're the first person who might actually have the means to fight back," she said simply. "Most people can't afford to take on an HOA legally. They just move. But you're different. Your property has special circumstances." I raised an eyebrow. "You know about the utility easement. My husband worked for the county planning department before he retired. He recognized your address when the complaints about your forge came up at the last meeting." She opened her portfolio and handed me a business card. I'm a retired corporate attorney. I'd be happy to offer my services pro bono if you decide to push back against Pamela's crusade. I took her card, turning it over in my hands. Why would you do that for someone you just met? Nancy's expression hardened slightly. Because 2 years ago, Pamela's vendetta forced our neighbors, a lovely elderly couple, to sell their home of 30 years because their garden didn't conform to her aesthetic standards. They died within 6 months of moving, and I'm convinced the stress contributed to their decline. I nodded slowly, understanding dawning. This isn't just about my forge. No, Nancy agreed. It's about reigning in an HOA that's forgotten its purpose is to maintain property values, not micromanage people's lives. I was planning to fight this anyway, I told her. But I'd appreciate your insight. Nancy smiled. Excellent. Now, tell me everything that's happened so far. Over the next few days, Nancy helped me prepare a formal response to the HOA's notice. We drafted a letter that outlined my property rights under county zoning laws, the specific terms of the utility easement, and a subtle reminder of what could happen if utility access were to become complicated due to ongoing legal disputes. The day before the HOA's deadline, I received another visit, this time from Pamela Whitfield alone, without her legal entourage. "Mr. Xavier," she said, her voice honey-sweet in a way that immediately put me on edge. "I was hoping we could discuss our situation without lawyers present." Neighbor to neighbor, I gestured toward my porch. "Would you like some iced tea?" She looked surprised by the offer but nodded. Once we were seated with drinks in hand, Pamela got straight to business. "I understand you've been talking with Nancy Cooper," she said, a hint of displeasure coloring her tone. "Word travels fast in Oak Ridge, I see." "It's a close-knit community," Pamela replied, "which is precisely why we have standards, Mr. Xavier. Standards that your blacksmithing operation violates." "It's not blacksmithing, technically. I'm a metalsmith specializing in architectural and artistic ironwork," I corrected. "And I've reviewed the covenants thoroughly. My workshop is in compliance with both county regulations and HOA guidelines for home-based businesses." Pamela's smile tightened. "The board disagrees with your interpretation." "I'm sure they do, but before we go down that road, I think there's something you should understand about my property." I pulled out the survey map Marcus had highlighted for me. "Are you familiar with the utility infrastructure of Oak Ridge Estates?" Pamela glanced at the document. "I don't see how that's relevant." "It's relevant because my property contains the main junction point for all utilities serving Oak Ridge. The easement that runs through my backyard is the only access point for repairs or maintenance on those systems." Her eyes narrowed slightly. And while I would never interfere with legitimate utility access, any legal action against me could potentially complicate matters. For instance, emergency repairs might require access at times that could disrupt court proceedings. "Are you threatening to block utility access to the neighborhood?" Pamela's voice had lost all pretense of friendliness. "Not at all," I said mildly. "I'm simply pointing out that my property's unique position creates certain complexities that might be best avoided by finding a reasonable compromise regarding my workshop." Pamela set down her glass with a sharp clink. "This sounds like extortion, Mr. Xavier." "It's negotiation, Miss Whitfield, something I believe HOAs and homeowners should engage in before resorting to legal threats." I leaned forward. "I've lived here 6 months. In that time, I've kept my property immaculate, contributed to the community by repairing the damaged entrance gate for free, and created pieces that have actually drawn positive attention to Oak Ridge. What is it about my forge that actually bothers you?" For a moment, Pamela seemed taken aback by the direct question. The noise, for one thing, the aesthetics for another, and the safety concerns having an active forge in a residential area is simply unacceptable. The noise occurs only between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays, well within the covenant's allowed times for construction and maintenance, I countered. As for aesthetics, my workshop is behind my house and screened by trees, and regarding safety, I have all required permits and insurance. The county fire marshal inspected and approved my setup. Pamela's jaw tightened. Nevertheless, the board has decided the board can reconsider, I interrupted gently. I'm not looking for special treatment, Miss Whitfield. I'm looking for reasonable accommodation for a legitimate permitted business that happens to be my livelihood. She stood abruptly. I'll bring your concerns to the board, but I wouldn't get your hopes up, Mr. Xavier. Rules are rules. As she walked back to her car, I called after her. My formal response to your notice will be delivered tomorrow, Miss Whitfield. I hope the board reviews it carefully before deciding their next move. The following day, Nancy accompanied me to the HOA office to deliver our response. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly when she saw the thick packet we handed over. Please ensure this reaches all board members before any further action is taken regarding my property, I said politely. Nancy and I had barely made it back to my truck when my phone rang a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Xavier. This is Robert Johnson, Vice President of the Oak Ridge HOA Board. I've just been briefed on your situation. I think we should meet as soon as possible to discuss a resolution. I glanced at Nancy, who raised an eyebrow. I'm available this afternoon, I told him. Excellent. And if you don't mind, please bring your attorney and those property documents. I'd like to see them firsthand. 3 hours later, Nancy and I sat across from Robert Johnson and another board member, Teresa Liu, in the community center conference room. Notably absent was Pamela Whitfield. Robert, a retired judge with a no-nonsense demeanor, studied the utility easement documents carefully. I was not aware of the extent of this easement when the complaint about your forge was brought to the board, he admitted. Pamela presented it as a straightforward covenant violation. Teresa nodded in agreement. The board wasn't given complete information. We've had several incidents lately where selective information has been presented to push certain agendas. Nancy made a soft noise that might have been, I told you so, but said nothing. Given what I'm seeing here, Robert continued, and the fact that your business does appear to be operating within the parameters allowed for home-based businesses in our covenants, I believe we can reach an accommodation. What kind of accommodation? I asked cautiously. The primary complaint was noise, Teresa explained. If you could agree to specific operating hours for the forge, perhaps 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. weekdays, and maybe add some additional sound barriers around your workshop, I think we could resolve this without further escalation. I considered the proposal. The hours were slightly more restricted than my current schedule, but not unreasonable. I can work with those hours, I agreed, and I've been planning to add some acoustic panels anyway. Excellent, Robert said, extending his hand. I'll draft a formal agreement for the board to review at our next meeting. In the meantime, consider the notice of violation suspended. As we shook hands, I couldn't help asking, will Miss Whitfield be on board with this arrangement? Robert and Teresa exchanged glances. Pamela doesn't speak for the entire board, Mr. Xavier, despite what she might believe, Robert said carefully. Rest assured, this matter will be resolved properly. As Nancy and I left the meeting, I felt cautiously optimistic. That went better than expected, I remarked. Don't celebrate yet, Nancy warned. Pamela won't take this lying down. Trust me, she was right. The very next morning, as I was setting up for the day's work well after 10 a.m., a county code enforcement vehicle pulled into my driveway, followed closely by Pamela's sedan. The code enforcement officer, a weary-looking man named Davis, approached my workshop with clipboard in hand. "Mr. Xavier, we've received a complaint about unpermitted structures and potential fire hazards on your property." Behind him, Pamela stood with her arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her face. I sighed and set down my tools. "Officer Davis, I have all the necessary permits for my workshop and forge. The county fire marshal inspected everything when I set up 6 months ago." "I'll need to see those permits," he said professionally. As I went inside to retrieve my documentation, I saw Pamela walking the perimeter of my property, taking photos with her phone. By the time I returned with my permits and inspection certificates, she was pointing at something near the utility access point at the back of my property. Officer Davis reviewed my paperwork carefully, comparing it to his notes. "These all appear to be in order, Mr. Xavier. Your permits are current and the fire marshal's approval is documented." "Then why are you here?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Davis glanced back at Pamela, who was now approaching us. "We received a complaint this morning about multiple violations." "I'm required to investigate any formal complaint." "And," I prompted. "And so far, I'm not seeing any violations," he confirmed. "Your setup meets code requirements." Pamela inserted herself into the conversation. "What about the structure at the back of the property?" "The one covering the utility access. That wasn't disclosed in any of the HOA architectural review submissions." Davis looked to me questioningly. "That's a utility shed that was here when I purchased the property," I explained. "It houses access panels and monitoring equipment for the neighborhood utilities. It's maintained by the utility companies, not me." "May I see it?" Davis asked. I led him to the small shed at the back of my property, unlocking it with the key the utility company had provided when I bought the place. Inside were various meters, junction boxes, and control panels, all clearly labeled with utility company information. "This is all standard equipment," Davis noted, making entries on his clipboard, "and clearly predates your ownership." Pamela peered into the shed. "But the structure itself, was it approved by the HOA Architectural Committee, Miss Whitfield?" I said, my patience wearing thin. "This structure has been here since the neighborhood was developed. It's on the original property surveys and is explicitly mentioned in my deed as part of the utility easement. If the HOA has an issue with it, they should take it up with the utility companies who installed and maintain it." Davis cleared his throat. "Mr. Xavier is correct. These utility structures are exempt from standard building permit requirements and HOA restrictions due to their essential service nature. They fall under different regulatory frameworks." Pamela's face flushed. "That's not the point. The point is that Mr. Xavier is operating an industrial business in a residential neighborhood, creating noise and safety hazards." "Madam," Davis interrupted gently, "I've inspected the entire property. The metalworking shop meets all county requirements for home-based businesses. The equipment is properly installed and maintained. There are no code violations that I can identify. But if you have specific safety concerns, you're welcome to file them with my office for review," Davis continued, closing his clipboard. "But based on today's inspection, I'm not finding any actionable violations." Pamela stared at him for a moment, then at me, before turning on her heel and marching back to her car. The slam of her car door echoed across my property as Davis handed me a copy of his inspection report. "Clean bill of health," he said with a slight smile. Though I suspect this isn't the end of it. Probably not, I agreed. Thanks for being thorough, Davis nodded. Just doing my job. For what it's worth, my brother's a farrier. I appreciate the craft that goes into metalwork. After he left, I called Nancy to update her on the latest development. She's escalating, Nancy said grimly. Going around the board to the county is a significant step. Did Robert contact you about the agreement they discussed yesterday? Not yet, I told her. I'll reach out to him. In the meantime, document everything, every interaction, every inspection, every communication. And Nick, be careful. Pamela doesn't like losing. The next few days passed without incident. I adjusted my forge hours to comply with the proposed agreement, even though it hadn't been finalized yet, and began installing acoustic panels to further reduce the noise. Robert called to confirm that the board would be voting on our agreement at their next meeting, scheduled for the following week. Just when I thought things might be settling down, I arrived home from delivering a commission to find a water utility truck parked near my property. 2 workers were examining the junction box in the utility shed. "Everything okay?" I asked as I approached them. The older of the 2 workers straightened up. "Are you the homeowner? We got a report of a possible water leak affecting the main line through this easement." I frowned. "I haven't noticed any leaks. Who reported it?" "HOA president called it in," he replied, checking his work order. "Said there was standing water near the access point and possible contamination concerns." I looked around the bone-dry ground. "As you can see, there's no standing water anywhere." "And I'm out here every day, I would have noticed." The worker shrugged. "Well, we're here now, might as well do a complete check. These systems are getting old anyway. Neighborhood's what, 20 years old?" "About that," I confirmed. The workers spent the next hour running tests and checking pressure in various parts of the system. As expected, they found no leaks or issues. As they were packing up, the younger worker handed me a card. "Just so you know, these service calls get billed to whoever reported the problem if we don't find an actual issue. Given that the HOA called this in, they'll be getting the bill about $450 for the emergency response." I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. "I'm sure they'll be thrilled." That evening, as I was finishing dinner, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Teresa Liu standing on my porch, looking troubled. "Mr. Xavier, I apologize for coming by unannounced," she said. "May I come in? I think we need to talk." I invited her in, offering coffee, which she accepted gratefully. "I'm here unofficially," she explained once we were seated at my kitchen table. "There have been some concerning developments with the board that I think you should be aware of." "Concerning how?" Teresa sighed. "Pamela called an emergency executive session of the board this afternoon without Robert, who's out of town until tomorrow. She presented a series of alleged violations related to your property and pushed through a vote to pursue immediate legal action against you." I felt my stomach tighten. "What kind of legal action?" "A cease and desist order for your business operations and potentially an injunction." Teresa looked genuinely distressed. 3 board members voted in favor, including Pamela. 2 were absent, including Robert. I was the only no vote. "That can't be legal," I protested. "Robert told me the matter was on hold pending our agreement." Pamela claimed new evidence of code violations necessitated immediate action, Teresa explained. She showed photos of what she claimed were hazardous conditions around the utility access point. "The county inspector found no violations just days ago." "I know. I brought that up, but she dismissed it, saying the inspector didn't have the necessary expertise to evaluate utility safety concerns." Teresa shook her head. "Nick, I think she's fixated on shutting you down and she's willing to bend rules to make it happen." "Why? What does she have against me personally? Teresa hesitated. It might not be personal. Pamela's husband owns a high-end residential development company. They've been trying to buy up properties in Oak Ridge to combine lots for larger luxury homes. Your property, with its unique easement situation, would be particularly valuable to them. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. So this isn't about my forge at all. It's about getting me to sell. I can't prove that, Teresa cautioned, but the timing is suspicious. 3 homeowners who resisted selling to Whitfield Development in the past year all found themselves facing aggressive HOA enforcement actions shortly thereafter. I ran a hand through my hair, processing this new information. What happens next? You'll likely receive legal notice tomorrow. The board has authorized our attorneys to file for an emergency injunction to shut down your forge immediately, claiming it poses an imminent threat to community safety. That's absurd, I said, anger rising. They won't get an emergency injunction based on manufactured concerns that have already been dismissed by county officials. Probably not, Teresa agreed, but they can tie you up in legal proceedings that could be costly and time-consuming to fight. I thought for a moment. Thank you for the warning, Teresa. I appreciate your honesty. I believe in fairness, Mr. Xavier. What's happening to you isn't fair. She stood to leave. I should go before someone notices my car here, but I wanted you to have time to prepare. After Teresa left, I immediately called Nancy and Marcus, filling them in on this latest development. They arrived at my house within the hour, bringing with them stacks of legal reference materials and take-out Chinese food. This is actually good news, Marcus said as he helped himself to Kung Pao chicken. Nancy and I both stared at him. How do you figure? I asked. Because now we know the real motivation, he explained. This isn't about HOA regulations, it's about real estate acquisition. And that changes everything. Nancy nodded slowly. He's right. If Pamela is using her HOA position to target homeowners who won't sell to her husband's company, that's a clear conflict of interest, possibly even illegal. Definitely illegal, Marcus confirmed. HOA board members have a fiduciary duty to the association. Using that position for personal financial gain is a breach of that duty. So what do? I asked. We don't wait for them to come at us, Nancy said decisively. We go on the offensive. Marcus agreed. First thing tomorrow, we file a complaint with the State Real Estate Commission regarding potential ethics violations by Pamela Whitfield. We also notify the county of possible misuse of public resources. That false water leak report wasn't just petty. It was potentially criminal misuse of emergency services. And I'll contact every board member individually, Nancy added. Many of them don't know the full story. Once they understand what's really happening, they might reconsider their support for Pamela's vendetta. We spent the next few hours developing a strategy, reviewing documents, and preparing for what would likely be a contentious battle. By the time Marcus and Nancy left, I felt more prepared but also keenly aware of the storm brewing on my horizon. True to Teresa's warning, a courier arrived the next morning with legal documents, a notice of emergency HOA board action, and a copy of the injunction request they had filed with the county court. The allegations were even more outlandish than I'd expected, claiming my forge created toxic emissions endangering vulnerable residents, and that my activities threatened the structural integrity of essential community infrastructure. I was just finishing my review of the documents when my phone rang. Robert Johnson. "Nick, I just got back into town and heard what happened," he said without preamble. "I want you to know I had no part in this, and I'm furious about how Pamela has handled this situation." "I appreciate that, Robert. Teresa filled me in last night. Good. I've called an emergency board meeting for this evening. I can't promise I can undo what's been done, but I'm going to try to bring some sanity back to this process. Before you do, I said, there's something you should know about Pamela's possible motivations. I explained what Teresa had shared about Whitfield Development's interest in Oak Ridge properties, including mine. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. That would explain a lot, Robert finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. If this is true, it goes beyond HOA overreach. It's potentially criminal. My attorney is filing complaints with the appropriate agencies today, I told him. But I wanted you to have this information before the board meeting. Thank you, Nick. I'll see that it's addressed. He paused. One more thing, has anyone from the utility companies contacted you directly? Pamela mentioned something about them having concerns about your activities near the easement. No, I said firmly. In fact, utility workers were here yesterday responding to a false leak report and found nothing wrong. They said they'd be billing the HOA for the unnecessary call-out. Robert's dry chuckle held little humor. Of course they did. All right, Nick. Sit tight. I'll call you after the meeting tonight. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Marcus confirmed he had filed complaints with both the State Real Estate Commission and the County Ethics Board. Nancy reported that she'd spoken with 3 other board members, all of whom were disturbed by what they were learning about Pamela's potential conflict of interest. By evening, I was restless, unable to focus on work or anything else while waiting for news from the board meeting. Around 8 p.m., my phone finally rang, not Robert but Nancy. You need to turn on the local news, she said without greeting. Channel 5, now. I scrambled for my remote and turned on the TV. There on the screen was Pamela Whitfield, looking decidedly uncomfortable as she was confronted by a reporter outside the community center. Mrs. Whitfield, do you deny that your husband's company has been attempting to purchase the property in question? The reporter asked, microphone extended. Pamela's usual composure had evaporated. My husband's business dealings are separate from my HOA responsibilities. This is harassment. But public records show that 3 other homeowners who refused to sell to Whitfield Development were subsequently targeted with HOA violations. Do you deny there's a pattern? The camera followed Pamela as she pushed past the reporter and hurried to her car, refusing to answer further questions. The scene cut back to the studio anchor. That was live from Oak Ridge Estates, where allegations have emerged that the president of the Homeowners Association may have abused her position to pressure homeowners into selling to a development company owned by her husband. County officials have confirmed they are reviewing complaints related to potential ethics violations. We'll bring you more on this developing story as information becomes available. I muted the TV and returned to my call with Nancy. How did this hit the news so fast? That would be me, she admitted. I have a former colleague who works as a producer at Channel 5. Once I explained what was happening, she thought it was newsworthy. You're scary, you know that, I said, half joking. Only when necessary, she replied. But here's what you really need to know. The board meeting was intense. Robert presented everything we gave him, plus some financial records he pulled showing that Pamela never disclosed her conflict of interest regarding properties the HOA took action against. 2 board members who had sided with her immediately withdrew their support for the injunction. So the legal action is off. Better than that. The board has suspended Pamela pending an investigation and voted to withdraw the injunction request entirely. Robert is drafting a formal apology to you as we speak. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That's incredible. It's just the beginning, Nancy said. There will likely be further fallout once the State Real Estate Commission investigates, but for now, your forge is safe. The next morning, I received not only Robert's formal apology, but also a revised agreement regarding my workshop that was actually more favorable than the original proposal we had discussed. The new terms acknowledged my property's special status due to the utility easement and granted specific permissions for my metalworking business that would be immune from future HOA challenges. As I was reviewing the documents, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. A man in an expensive suit emerged, older, with silver hair and a deeply tanned face. I recognized him immediately from news coverage of local real estate developments. Gerald Whitfield. I set the papers aside and went out to meet him, stopping at the edge of my porch. "Mr. Xavier," he called, not approaching closer. "I wonder if I might have a word." "You can say what you need to from there," I replied coolly. He nodded, seemingly unsurprised by my caution. "Fair enough. I've come to offer an apology for my wife's actions and to assure you that Whitfield Development had no official involvement in her misguided efforts." "Is that so?" I crossed my arms. "Because I have documentation suggesting a pattern of HOA enforcement actions, specifically targeting homeowners who refuse to sell to your company." Gerald's expression tightened briefly before he forced a smile. "Unfortunate coincidences, I'm sure. Nevertheless, I want to clear the air. Pamela has resigned from the HOA board, effective immediately." "I hadn't heard that," I said, genuinely surprised. "It's for the best," he said smoothly. "She's been under tremendous pressure lately. The board position was simply too much on top of her other responsibilities." I doubted stress was the real reason, but I nodded anyway. "Is that all you came to say?" Gerald hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "I'd also like to make you an offer for your property." A very generous offer, well above market value in recognition of its unique features. I stared at the envelope but made no move to take it. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm not interested in selling. Not now, not later." "You haven't even heard the number," he protested mildly. "Doesn't matter. This is my home and my workshop is my livelihood. They're not for sale." Gerald studied me for a long moment, then returned the envelope to his pocket. "I respect your position, Mr. Xavier, but should you change your mind—" "I won't," I said firmly. He nodded once, then returned to his vehicle. As he drove away, I couldn't help feeling that a chapter had closed, but the book wasn't finished yet. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from Pamela's actions continued to reverberate through Oak Ridge. The State Real Estate Commission launched a formal investigation into potential ethics violations by both Whitfield Development and Pamela personally. 3 former homeowners who had been pressured to sell came forward with their stories, prompting the county prosecutor to review the cases for possible criminal charges related to abuse of position and coercion. Robert Johnson was elected interim HOA president and immediately instituted new transparency measures for board actions. Teresa Liu headed up a committee to revise the HOA bylaws to prevent similar abuses in the future. As for me, I returned to my forge with renewed energy and purpose. The publicity from the scandal had an unexpected benefit. Inquiries about my metalwork increased dramatically, with several high-end clients specifically mentioning they had heard my story on the news. 1 month after the confrontation, Nancy stopped by my workshop as I was finishing a decorative railing for a local restaurant. "How's business?" she asked, admiring the intricate scrollwork. "Better than ever," I admitted, setting down my tools. "You know, in a weird way, I almost want to thank Pamela," Nancy laughed. I wouldn't go that far, but there is some poetic justice in how things turned out. I gestured toward my house. Coffee, I've got news. Once we were seated on my back deck with steaming mugs, I shared what I'd learned from Robert that morning. The prosecutor has filed charges against Pamela for misuse of position and attempted extortion, I told her. Apparently, they found evidence that she had used HOA funds to pay for private investigations of homeowners who wouldn't sell to Gerald's company. Nancy shook her head in disbelief. The arrogance is staggering. Did she really think no one would ever connect the dots? Power corrupts, I said simply. Even the small-scale power of an HOA presidency. Speaking of power, Nancy said, have you considered Robert's suggestion about joining the board? I had been surprised when Robert called the previous week to ask if I'd consider running for a board position in the upcoming special election. My initial reaction had been an emphatic no, but I'd been thinking about it since then. I'm still on the fence, I admitted. I'm not exactly the HOA type. That's precisely why you should do it, Nancy argued. The board needs people who understand the difference between maintaining standards and enforcing personal agendas. You've experienced firsthand what happens when that line gets blurred. I sipped my coffee thoughtfully. You make a good point, and I suppose having a voice in HOA decisions would be better than always reacting to them. That's the spirit, Nancy said with a smile. Besides, imagine Pamela's face if she heard you'd taken her place on the board. I laughed. Now there's a selling point. 2 days later, Gerald Whitfield was arrested on charges of conspiracy and racketeering related to his company's business practices. The investigation that had begun with Pamela's HOA activities had expanded to reveal a pattern of questionable tactics in multiple developments across the county. The local news showed footage of him being escorted from his office in handcuffs, his face a mask of outrage. The following week, I submitted my application for the open board position. To my surprise, I ran unopposed and was unanimously approved by the remaining board members. My first official board meeting was an eye-opening experience. The issues ranged from the mundane, approving a new mailbox design, to the complex, negotiating a new landscaping contract for common areas. Throughout it all, I found myself advocating for balanced, reasonable standards without unnecessary restrictions, transparent processes, and respect for homeowners' rights. 6 months after the confrontation that had nearly cost me my forge, I stood in my workshop putting the finishing touches on a special commission and ironwork sign for the Oak Ridge Estates entrance. The design incorporated elements that represented the community. Oak leaves for the neighborhood name, flowing lines suggesting the creek that ran through the property, and subtle architectural details that echoed the homes themselves. As I worked, I reflected on how differently things might have turned out had I not known about the utility easement that ran through my property, how one small detail in a property deed had provided the leverage needed to stand up to an overzealous HOA and ultimately expose a web of corruption that had been affecting the entire community. The forge glowed, heating the metal to the perfect temperature for my final adjustments. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sounds of children playing in the park that the HOA had recently renovated, a project I had helped approve in my new role as board member. I lifted my hammer, the weight familiar and reassuring in my hand, and struck the metal one final time. The sound rang out clear and true, no longer a symbol of conflict but of creation and renewal, both for my work and for Oak Ridge Estates itself. The next day, when the new sign was installed at the neighborhood entrance, several residents gathered to witness the unveiling. Robert gave a short speech about community renewal and the importance of balancing standards with individual rights. As the covering was removed to reveal my handiwork, applause broke out among the gathered neighbors. Later, as people mingled and examined the sign up close, an elderly gentleman approached me. "Fine work," he said, running his hand appreciatively along one of the curved elements. "You know, I've lived here 20 years, and this is the first time I've felt like we were actually a community rather than just a collection of houses with the same rules." I smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. "Sometimes it takes a little friction to create something worthwhile," I said, thinking of the heat and hammer blows that transformed raw metal into something both beautiful and enduring. Just like Oak Ridge itself had been transformed not despite the conflict, but because of it. The utility easement that ran through my property had provided more than just leverage in a dispute. It had become the connection point for something far more important than water or electricity, the renewed bonds of a neighborhood rediscovering what it meant to be a true community.